All right, so ready to really dive into the ancient Greek Olympics. But like, you want more than just the surface level, right? Let's uncover the stories behind it, all the traditions. What made this era in history so fascinating? Like, we're talking rituals, rivalries, even some rules that would probably make modern athletes scratch their heads.
It's amazing, though. These games were like a perfect snapshot of Greek society. You can see their values, their beliefs, even some of their anxieties, all reflected in how these games were run.
Let's set the scene then, okay? Picture ancient Greece, 776 BC. Like centuries before Rome even comes into the picture. This is when the very first Olympics were held. And not on Mount Olympus, as you might think. They were held in a place called Olympia. Why Olympia?
Well, see, Olympia wasn't just some random location. It was a sacred spot, okay, a sanctuary, dedicated to Zeus, the king of the gods. So choosing Olympia for the games, it wasn't by chance. It gave the games this huge religious significance, right? It's like they were part of this massive festival celebrating Zeus and all that he represented, and the competitions, the athletic events, they were just one piece of this giant event.
So this wasn't just some small local competition then, right?
No, not at all. Think about it. Messengers would be sent out across the entire Greek world, spreading the word of the games, but also announcing a sacred truce, basically a time of peace. This ensured that everyone, athletes, spectators, could travel safely to Olympia for the games. Imagine that. City-states that were constantly at each other's throats, they would set aside their differences all in the name of sports and honoring the gods. It's pretty powerful when you think about it. And that truce, it wasn't just about getting to the games safely. It was like a thread woven through the whole thing. Even the events themselves showed that desire for unity. I mean, the first Olympics, just 1-foot race the stadium, basically a sprint, about 200 meters. But as time went on, the games, they changed. They got so much bigger.
Right, it wasn't just like, okay, let's add a marathon or something. Some of these events were intense, like a world away from what we think of as track and field now.
Totally.
Yeah.
You want to talk intense? Boxing and wrestling were huge back then. But brutal, man. Brutal. Think no gloves in boxing, just leather wrapped around their hands. And forget rounds. They just went at it until someone couldn't get up.
Yeah, I read about that. Talk about a knockout punch.
Yeah.
And then there's pancration. I mean, a mix of boxing and wrestling with almost no rules.
Yeah.
That's got to be one of the most intense things they did at the ancient games.
Oh, it was the ultimate test. Strength, skill, the whole package.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, almost no rules. Biting and gouging, those were a no-go. But everything else, pretty much fair game.
I'm cringing just thinking about it. And we haven't even gotten to the whole competing nude thing. The research I did mention a few different theories about that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that makes you go, huh, different times. Some scholars think it was just practical, no clothes, total freedom of movement. Plus, way harder to cheat that way. Can't hide weights under your clothes if you're not wearing any. But then there's the symbolic side. Some think it connected the athletes to the gods, like it emphasized how sacred the games were.
It's definitely a window into a very different culture, that's for sure. But in all this talk about brutality and bare-it-all athletes, it's important to remember that it wasn't all about brute strength at the ancient Olympics, right?
Totally. The pentathlon, for example, that was a real test of all-around athleticism. We're talking running, jumping, discus, javelin, wrestling, 5 events in total. To win that, you had to be good at, well, everything.
Puts our modern-day decathletes to shame, huh? Speaking of which, I'd love to know more about how these ancient athletes trained. It wasn't just a casual show up and compete kind of deal, was it?
Not a chance. These guys were the real deal. We're talking months, sometimes years of intense training leading up to the games. Strict diets, crazy training schedules, often under the watchful eye of these legendary trainers. They were putting their bodies through the ringer, all for a shot at glory. And not just personal glory either. They were competing for their city-state, their people. The pressure was on.
Talk about pressure. But on the flip side, can you imagine the feeling of actually winning? I mean, forget endorsement deals and all that jazz. What did these guys get if they came out on top?
Yeah, no million-dollar contracts back then, that's for sure. The main prize was actually pretty simple, an olive wreath.
An olive wreath, like that's it.
Well, yeah, but you have to understand, it wasn't just any wreath. It was a symbol, man, a symbol of ultimate achievement, like the highest honor in their society.
Right, of course. But it wasn't just about the wreath itself, though, was it? The sources I read made it pretty clear that the real reward went way beyond that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Think about it. These guys weren't just athletes, they were heroes. They were treated like kings, with free meals for life, prime seats at the theater, even tax breaks.
Whoa, perks fit for a champion. I'd trade my gym membership for free food and front row seats any day. But I'm guessing the real prize, the thing that really got these guys going, was the fame that came with winning.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking next level fame here. Their stories were immortalized in poems and songs. Statues were erected in their honor. They became legends, larger-than-life figures whose names echoed through history.
What a motivator, right?
Yeah.
With all that glory on the line, all that pressure, I imagine the rules were taken pretty seriously, right? Like, what happened if you tried to bend the rules, maybe get a little edge over the competition?
Oh, you better believe it. These games were about more than just physical prowess. Remember, it was about honoring the gods, too. So any kind of cheating potions, tripping an opponent, even taking bribes, it wasn't just bad sportsmanship. It was considered a serious offense against the gods themselves.
So basically, you did not want to get caught cheating at the ancient Olympics.
Yeah.
What were the consequences like?
Let's just say they weren't messing around. The punishments varied, of course, depending on what you did. But we're talking hefty fines, public humiliation, even floggings. And it wasn't just the athlete who suffered either. Bringing shame upon the games, that brought shame on your entire city-state. Talk about pressure.
It's so interesting how everything about these games, the athletes, the events, the rules, it all loops back to this deep respect for the gods and this sense of collective identity, this idea of the city-state above all else. Which makes you wonder, how did something so deeply rooted, so integral to their culture, eventually fade away?
It's a story with a lot of layers, actually. A whole bunch of things happen, all these different factors that eventually led to the decline of the ancient games. And it's important to remember, we're not talking overnight here. This was a gradual process, something that took centuries to unfold.
So what were some of the biggest factors that led to their decline? It's hard to imagine something so ingrained in their culture just disappearing.
Right. You'd think it would last forever. Well, one thing was the Roman Empire. As Rome got bigger and more powerful, well, Greece ended up under their control. And the Romans, they liked Greek culture, sure, but they had their own thing going on, their own traditions, their own priorities. So the Olympics, with all their connections to Greek gods and Greek customs, they just weren't as important anymore. Not to the Romans.
So as Roman influence grew, the Olympics maybe became less about those core Greek ideals and more about, well, fitting into this new political landscape.
Yeah.
Were there any other changes happening around that time? Culturally, I mean. Yeah, things that might have affected how people saw the games.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Christianity, it was starting to spread, and it really changed things. Think about it. The Olympics, they were all about honoring Zeus and the other Greek gods, right?
Right.
Well,
And the-
to the early Christians, that was like the opposite of their beliefs.
Right. So the very thing that gave the games, meaning their connection to the divine, that ultimately leads to their downfall as religious beliefs shifted. It's kind of a strange twist.
Yeah, it's kind of a classic example of how these big cultural shifts can change even the oldest traditions. And it wasn't just those big picture things either. Think natural disasters, invasions, even just the slow decay of the site at Olympia itself. It all adds up. Over time, it all makes it harder and harder to keep the games going the way they used to.
The perfect storm, almost. It makes their legacy even more impressive when you think about it, to have lasted for so long with all those challenges.
Absolutely. And you know what? Even though those ancient games came to an end, their spirit, it never really died out. The modern Olympic Games, the ones we have now, they're a testament to that. The drive to be the best, the thrill of competition, the idea of bringing people together from all over the world, those core values, they still resonate today, just like they did thousands of years ago.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think that athletes from so long ago competing in a world we can barely imagine, they still have the power to inspire us today. They're like a reminder that the drive to push limits to be great, it's timeless.
And isn't that the coolest thing about the ancient Olympics? It's not just about dates and names and all that. It's about recognizing that deep down, even with all the change, all the ups and downs, the human spirit, that desire for something bigger than ourselves, it's what connects us all across time, across cultures.
What a thought to end on, right?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about what we'll leave behind for future generations and what they'll find fascinating about our world.
Exactly. History. It's not just something in the past, It's the story of us. It's all connected.
This has been fantastic. Thanks for geeking out with me about the ancient Greek Olympics, exploring not just the games themselves, but really getting into the heart of what they meant, what they represented. It's been eye-opening.